Welcome. This is another episode of the Buddhist Yoga Podcast. I'm very honored again to have Lopon Yudron Wangmo, the director of Mayum Mountain Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, Lopon Yudron.
Thank you, James. I can't believe you're actually having me twice. That's amazing.
I'm celebrating the occasion of receiving further teaching through this wonderful new book. If you can share the name of it and the topic.
Well, I happen to have one right here. Clearing the Way to Awakening. And the subject, it says a 9-step practice from Tibetan Buddhism. And the 9 steps refer to our foundation practices known as Ngondro. Ngondro literally mean what goes before, but it's kind of metaphorical. Certainly it is a step in your progress. As a Vajrayana Buddhist practitioner, it's something that's required of most of us, or recommended anyway. But also, it's something people practice their whole lives in one form or another. So it's like the bedrock. That and in my opinion, it may be the most obviously transformational practice that we do in Vajrayana Buddhism. I'm not necessarily saying that you're going to be awakened or enlightened when you're completed your Ngondro, but you go, the process of changing from someone who's super, I don't know, in my case, really wrapped up in a lot of afflictive emotions, they say, painful emotions, and suffering a lot emotionally, and with a lot of ups and downs and back and forth, and a lot of drama in my life. And this, they call it stabilizing your practice. And I didn't know what to make of that phrase when I came into Tibetan Buddhism, but the Ngondro collection of practices, it takes you from being an ordinary person. If you're doing it seriously, you're really engaging and working with the practice deeply, who's just concerned about getting what you want, not getting what you don't want, and also about you, about me, me, and so terribly horrified and shocked when things don't go your way, and things come, or endings happen all the time. There's always beginnings, there's always endings. So readapting to a whole nother way of being, kind of a big picture way of living your life, where you have a very long-term goal of awakening. And that's the main thing. That's the main thing in your life, is how am I going to advance myself toward awakening. And what does that even mean, awakening? Learning what that means, and becoming a Dharma person. Each Buddhist tradition has their foundational practices. And for most of, although they do it at different stages, introduce at different stages of your path of practice in the different main lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. Ngondro is a part of all 4 of the main schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and I believe Bon as well. So anyway, I thought that people might want to know about it either before they jump into it, as a kind of, say, for example, you're someone who is really interested in consciousness. This is the way this manifests in our lives today. There's all kinds of fascinating, scholarly work, but also personal explorations that people are doing to look, deep within themselves and figure out what's the ultimate truth about myself? What's the ultimate truth about what I'm seeing and encountering with my senses? Lots of people have curiosity about these things. And so they hear about Tibetan Buddhism as being a very developed and advanced system for exploring these questions. And they might want to just get a preview by reading through the book. or other, wherever they want to explore that. Um, what would it involve? So they start like from that bottom level. I'm not saying bottom level in a dismissive way or a condescending way, but I'm saying just from the basics. If you don't know anything, I think this book would gradually introduce you to what that was all about, what it would be like to be a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, what we call Vajrayana Buddhism. And then, of course, there's people who are practicing Ngondro, and it's a process that for working people takes, for a minimum of 3 years to do. It's very intensive, like getting a black belt in karate or building your own house, or starting a farm or whatever these big goals are in your life that are not going to be, you can't do overnight. It involves, kind of delayed gratification, kind of an ultimate level of delayed gratification, because you don't jump right in and you're having fantastical experiences right away. It's something you're doing because you're convinced of its utility. And you have, and then there's role models, for people who just seem to ooze good qualities, who are teachers of Tibetan Buddhism, and or practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism, and you go, wow, how did they get that way? And maybe you've already started, and then there's obstacles that come up. So I address those well. I address our doubts as people who aren't, most people who read the book won't have been raised in a Buddhist family, and much less a Himalayan Buddhist family where this was commonly done. So I kind of address the practitioner. So that's what my book is all about. And I wanted to speak in plain English, people can understand, and it's be user friendly and be addressed to, I've gone through the experience of being a beginner, being from I wasn't from a Christian or Jewish family, but I was, my mother was a spiritualist minister, very interested in spirituality, and my father was a constitutional lawyer, very uninterested in spirituality, worked for Congress. And so I have both those sides to me, but I didn't have a background in Buddhism at all. And I came in with a lot of incorrect assumptions, and, just completely naive and naked into the world of Tibetan Buddhism. Unfortunately, I stumbled onto really good teachers. So Ngondro was life-changing for me.
And for the readers, I really want to encourage, whether that you are a beginner in Vajrayana or a practitioner with some experience, this book is for everyone. I found it very focused on the reader. I learned so much about I would say, your intention as a teacher. So I'm wondering if you can also tell us how you got started uh, in terms of being introduced to Ngondro, and then how did you progress through it? And I know a lot of these insights pepper the book, but how did you get introduced to Ngondro, and what did you learn that you can share?
Well, I could go back to childhood and say there were things that popped up for me that indicated that maybe I had some kind of connection to Tibetan tradition, but that could be a long story. So in short, I'll say that I was, I learned basic Buddhist practice called shamatha, or calm abiding, sort of peaceful meditation, and vipassana, insight meditation, and some tools for how to develop the qualities of a bodhisattva, the Tonglen, for example, and the four immeasurables. I learned a little bit about that. I was a really enthusiastic explorer, so I really threw myself into things. And then the idea was, if I really wanted to do Tibetan Buddhism, I honestly, that I needed a teacher. And so I asked around, at that time in California, where I lived at that time, still do, but what I'm saying is I lived other places where there wasn't so much Tibetan Buddhism. There were a lot of lamas around. So you could ask. I could ask my senior students at the Dharma Center I was practicing at, who had a good reputation, who they recommend. And then other people, the name would come up and they'd say, "Oh, really? You're going to you went and saw him, huh?" And it would be like, "Oh, there's something wrong there that they aren't saying, you know." So check with the senior students who've been doing it 10 or 20 or 30 years. I would say that would be what came out of it for me. It's because sometimes it seems like luck that I ended up with really, really good lamas. And then I think actually it wasn't 100% luck. There was guidance involved as well. So I explored all the lamas in here in Northern California because I felt like I wanted somebody I could actually see. And there wasn't any internet at that time. So it wasn't even, it was inconceivable that you could have a lama that you've never met in person, right? So I met them all. And then I went to a talk by a series of talks in various centers by Lama Tarchin Rinpoche, who's no longer with us. He's been gone 11, 12 years now. And at the recommendation of others, but he was what was happening. He was going all over, he had a new center in the Santa Cruz Mountains, Pama-Osaling, and he was going all over the San Francisco Bay Area doing talks. And how do we learn about them? We got, they had a text, for a while they had a fax list, so they could fax. You don't even know, you guys, some of you guys don't even know what a fax is, right? But they would fax things to your workplace, right? And that wasn't actually so weird in those days. Or then they had a phone tree, you know, which I later became a participant in. So one person would call, you know, 10 people, the next person would call, you know, 10 people and so forth. So that's the way it was in the 1990s. Anyway, I saw him touching all over the place talking, and he was, you know, he was unbelievable. I mean, he had charisma, and charisma can be a problem, you know, because if there's nothing to back it up, you know, narcissists have charisma, cult leaders have charisma. You have to be careful. I wasn't careful. But whatever it was, there's a couple of things I mentioned in the book that I went around, saw him, and then I saw him at his center, and I talked to his students, and I was a lesbian, still am, and I wanted to know whether it'd be okay for me there. So I asked about that, whether he was cool with LGBT people. We didn't have tea then. And he, and anyway, everybody said it was great, perfect. And actually some of his earliest students in 3-year retreat and so forth, he's always had people in his 3-year retreat centers and so forth, and people he guided very closely who were gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and he had a transgender student as well. So I felt comfortable with that. So in other words, I'm asking, you know, I'm checking it out, and I'm checking out how I feel being with the students. So I feel comfortable in that environment. And it was at that time, like, even though there weren't that many, it was mostly straight people there. That's only one aspect of reality, you know. I felt comfortable with them. It's like at that time it was kind of ragtag bunch of misfits. I don't think I'm saying this with all the love in the world, you know. People who just were very spiritually driven and didn't care much for the material world, and they just, you know, gravitated to the place, and they were living in trailers and yurts and so forth around the property. It's all been prettied up since then. And anyway, Rinpoche was wonderful. So 2 things that I noticed about him as I was considering, is this person a guru material besides the crowds and adulation that he had? And they were body things. One time I was at the Shambhala Center in Palo Alto, and I noticed when he sat down, came in, there's the usual hubbub as he comes in, and when he sat down to teach, he was just using his hands in this way that seemed like a dancer's hands. And weirdly, after I left the talk, I didn't remember anything about the content of the talk. I just remembered, you know, although he wasn't doing formal mudras or, you know, dance moves, which he, probably based on that background, but also on his mind was smooth and beautiful and elegant, and that was manifested in his hands. So that really, what about that? And then later, as I was getting closer and closer, I was crowded into a room at listening with him, and they didn't have a big shrine room then the way they do now, and kids and people shoulder to shoulder, and he was sitting, and there was a big window behind him, and he was in the middle of giving a talk, and this big window slipped down its frame like bang behind his head, really, really loud. Oh, you know, and all us ordinary people. And I don't think he even noticed. And it wasn't he was spaced out. It was just like, okay, another temporary phenomenon. You know, he's some people like that. You get a sense, you know, we talk, you know, people talk technically about the three kayas, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya. This is sort of Dharmakaya is like emptiness or being perfectly pure, formless form. Don't say Timi Norber Rinpoche used to say. And then Sambhogakayas technically are the manifestations that occurred for when highly awakened bodhisattvas are, their experience of the world includes seeing Buddhas and bodhisattvas, and they tend to appear in a certain kind of beauty, as very beautiful. And then Nirmanakaya is like this, that like Lama Tarchin, you know, like an embodiment of wisdom, of enlightenment. And that's a lot to say about that. There's a lot of things to talk about that idea, but basically, I always had the sense that his mind, his consciousness was abiding more in the open, vast, open expanse of space. Not that he was spaced out or removed from his body or a sense of not being present, very present and at home in this spacious expanse. It's hard to describe. It's a metaphor for a state of consciousness. It's not contained and framed as very. It's not grasping. It's not looking for anything. It's not trying to get what it wants and avoid what it doesn't want. It's hard to put into words. So they use words like the vast expanse and these kinds of things. Anyway, I always had the sense that his consciousness was just wide open and did not, you know, you can't cut openness, as he would often say, you know, emptiness, you know, you can't cut it, you can't burn it, you can't bang it with a hammer, you know. So there's something that's untouchable, deathless wisdom, as he would have said, you know. And so, and then there was this presence and a real body, and he had very much had a real body and a real personality. So he was there with us, but a sudden bang out of nowhere, it just went right through and out the other side. So that to me was something you couldn't, like a narcissist cult leader, they can't fake that, you know. They can't fake not being scared. There was any number of times I saw him not being freaked out about things that we were definitely freaked out about, you know. And so, anyway, so there was ways I was looking carefully at this fellow to see whether it was for real. He was for real, and he also, of course, was interesting quality of Latartian was he never went to Shedra or the Buddhist college. He always he had a very strong relationship with Dudjom Rinpoche. He did many years in retreat. And then his son, Timi Norber Rinpoche, very close relationship with him. So it was like a transmission that he'd received rather than didactic teaching, on the six, quite often, like me, he'd say, well, there's a 5 Buddha families, and he'd get to number 3, and then he'd start asking people, what are the other 2? And I think if he had time to think about it, he would have been able to bring it up. But you know what I mean? It wasn't like school learning. It was gut learning from practice and from his total download from the lineage, which each Lama has they call a lineage, teacher to student, etc. And it's like a live wire that comes into us as a student, and not just to the special ones like Lama Tarchin, but to ordinary people like me and James, and all sincere practitioners are receiving a special immaterial something from their Lama or Lamas. So I can't even remember what you asked, James. I'm sorry. I do rattle on.
Absolutely. Well, it kind of put us into this space where those of us who are reading the book, you can see something notable about this trust and this following. I was listening to a talk by Lama Tarchin yesterday, and he was talking about fulfilling the wishes of Lama Sherab. And he was, what you're beginning to share about is guru yoga and devotion, I believe.
Yes.
It's really comes through in this book. I see your conscientiousness and care and the stories you chose, but it's also for the new practitioner on the path. How do they begin, and what can they look for in terms of a teacher to start? Yeah.
Yeah. So you asked. Now I remember what you asked, which was Ngondro. So then I wanted to start Ngondro once I knew he was a teacher for me. And actually, I recommend even being more cautious than that, and not assuming that the person you start with is going to be your all the time guru. They say examine teacher for 11 years. I can't say. I think that's a little long, because old teachers are really great. You want to meet the old, adepts, and follow them, because they have not only the wisdom to practice wisdom, but they have the experience of working with students, what works and doesn't work for them, and their advice is gold. So, but still keep questioning. Is this right for me? Is this the right person for me? Well, even after, you can start Ngondro with somebody as like a spiritual friend. You see, they know a lot more than you do. You kind of love them, and you trust what they're saying is the best information they have. And you don't necessarily yet see them as an emanation of a Buddha or, fully awakened or something like that, but they obviously care and have compassion, and they have good qualities. So start with that, with somebody, and then keep your net open and take time to decide you can have more than one Lama, but it's more work. The more Lamas you have, the more assignments you're going to get, and so bear that in mind. But so I have in the back of my book a directory of, I don't know, my sleuthing on who's really teaching Ngondro these days. I think I I wanted to do Europe, but I just didn't find that I had enough intel about who's great in Europe. So I made a little directory in the back and I didn't just include my Nyingma lineage, I included all 4 lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. The Sakyas didn't used to do Ngondro, but now they are doing it. And the current Sakya Treason has a book coming out very soon on the Ngondro that they do. And so I hope that's helpful as a place to start people exploring. And I remove from the places that are currently objects of public controversy. So I didn't want people to get wrapped up in someplace and call me years later and say, you told me to go to such and such a place and I got treated really badly. That would be awful. So anyways, but you still have to take care of yourself and not take my word for it. Okay, be really careful with yourself. Your spiritual care is the most important thing in your life. It's like, it's maybe more important than who you marry in some ways. And so take time, but if you love it, go for it. And also some centers don't focus on Ngondro. So I was doing a lot of investigation about who's really offering, and not just offering it like to one person one at a time, go do it, but where there's at least a few people doing it, a system of support, you know. And there's some centers like the Vajrayana Foundation, Dawn Mountain in Texas, and I can't name the other ones whose Ngondro programs are thriving right now because I'm not as tied in. And there's there's 2 or 3 people doing, and that's enough, you know, to get a sense. And nowadays you can get online, practice with them, get support from each other. That I had the good fortune to have a real group that I went to, and in San Francisco, a friend's house who had completed a 3-year retreat, and he helped us all get started and keep going with our Ngondro. We met every Saturday. That doesn't happen as much these days, you know, and it's very uncommon to have something local you can go to like that. So mostly it's taking place online. So yeah. And where were you going next, James?
Well, you know, while we were on this topic, before going back to some of the parts of Ngondro, I wonder if you had just some general advice, because Guru Yoga is such a essential part of practice and Ngondro. Is there something, some quality, do they have to have received so many empowerments and transmissions? How learned, or what's an essential quality of a spiritual guide? If you were to really think about, if someone wants to go that direction in a traditional relationship, what's the main thing that you would want to observe and know or hear from? And because you mentioned charisma, you mentioned the the benefit of learning so many aspects of, but when it comes to this kind of
Yeah, you know, I guess right at this moment I would say there's so many directions you could go with that, but one of the things is you definitely want to have a sense that they aren't they are there to foster your awakening. There's no other ulterior motive. Once you get a real teacher, you should help them. And they may even ask you, when you ask them, will you be my teacher? They may say, sure, yeah, and I need you to help me too. So it's not like of course you would, you know? Yeah, so it's not like they're never going to ask you for anything. But the motive has to be for the student to thrive. And so and they don't want sex from you. They don't want power from you. They don't want you don't wheedle your money out of you. I mean, this is obvious, and you'll see, you know, both in Control and John Ngondro Rinpoche and Patron Rinpoche's writings, who are authorities on guru-disciple relationship, they go through all the technical requirements, and we can talk some about that. And then a paragraph or 2 or 3 later, they say, yeah, but what they really need is compassion. You know, if you get a sense that they're compassionate and they're driven, that's what they're driven by, then you'll do okay, no matter what. And so that's why I'm sort of starting in on all this. So then they go through, but before that, they've gone through all these technical requirements. So there are, in Vajrayana Buddhism, a lama or a teacher can look like anyway, and they don't have to be a monk or a nun. It's really, in a way, considering there's many lamas, what is you know, what do you what's your image of a great guru? You know, uh, are they, joking around with people, hanging around in restaurants with their students? Are they sitting on a tall throne in a giant golden monastery on a hill? Are they, someone from your own culture? Is that really? I don't recommend being bound by that. I don't recommend being bound by they must be from your culture, they must be your gender. But if that's really really, really bottom line important to you, then you'll have to look for that, I guess. So they can look all kinds of different ways, and some people like wild llamas that are not teetotalers, and they're not celibate and so forth. And still, though, make sure they're driven by what's good for you, what's good for their students, not their own needs. That's the bottom line. And so, um, being a lama in Tibetan Buddhist tradition is not easy. Um, it requires you have received. We really haven't gone through what an empowerment is, but if you're going to transmit empowerment, you have to receive many, many empowerments, and you have to receive many, many what's called reading transmissions or agamas, moons, for all the texts of your tradition. And the really great lamas, they've received all the empowerments and wounds for a lot of different traditions. And then, but all they really require is from your tradition that you're going to practice from a specific tradition. And they need to show that they love their own teacher. If they're not, one of the signs of narcissism is that they never mention their own teachers. And so avoid that like the plague, and humility, at least especially, the tradition I'm from, it seems like it depends on you, it's like it is part of the tradition, the tradition of humility. Not just faking humility and saying, oh no, like feigning cultural, there's a Tibetan cultural thing about being humble. But that can be in the heart, or it could just be a superficial thing. I couldn't possibly sit on that throne. I'm nobody from nowhere. It can be real or it can be fake. So look for that. And they have to be learned, about their own tradition, either in this by studying at the knee, so to speak, of a great guru themselves, spending many years with them, receiving teachings sequentially like that, or having gone to a Shedra. Many of the best lamas today come out of Lalarungar Monastery in Golok, Tibet. And they're still going. They have equality of men and women there, then there are monks and nuns, so that there's female scholars coming out called Kinmo, and there's male scholars called Kempo coming out of that tradition. And likewise in the Gelugpa school, there's Geshe Mas coming out, female great scholars. And they do even more years of study in that tradition. They're very knowledgeable about everything from sutra to tantra generally. And then Geshe is the male. People usually say that the opposite way, because none of these positions were occupied by women until recently. And sex doesn't matter. You want them to have the balance between scholarly knowledge and practice. And the urgency for in the diaspora of Tibetan Buddhism, as it was, the Chinese communists took over in the late 1950s. And so in the 60s and 70s, their urgency was to reestablish great centers of learning in exile and great monastic centers and so forth. So in a way, the yogi tradition hasn't been promulgated as much, the tradition that my teachers, Lama Tarchen, Lopon Yudron Wangmo, came out of. I have a monk lama as well in Tibet. But yeah, so what I'm saying is there can be people, theoretically, that studied a lot and they didn't do much retreat. And then there's people that did a lot of retreat and didn't do much studying. And sort of the ideal gold standard teacher is someone who did both. You know, they're few in number, so they're called like king-like lamas. And there's no queen-like lamas yet, but we will. I'm sure that'll be a title eventually. Who have done years and years of retreat, and years and years and years of study, and you know, totally devoted to their teachers, and they have great compassion. Their conduct is amazingly perfect, and so forth. There's a few of those. And then there's others who are simple yogis who are just transmitting from the heart what their teacher told them. And then there's kind of there's lamas in Tibet. I've been told there's lamas who were never told to teach or given a title by anyone, but because in there, probably a rural area, they had the people were familiar with the qualities of a lama, and they were became to be viewed naturally as a lama and called lama and so forth, or lopon or whatever, you know. And so that's kind of a naturally arisen lama, and that's legit too. And it's everything in the. And then there's the tuku system, which is a complicated subject, you know, about I mentioned the word nirmanakaya, embodiment. Well, there's also a system of recognizing embodiments of past great figures, and in a child, usually a boy, and usually a Himalayan boy, and then raising them from childhood to teach and lead. And sometimes that goes really extraordinarily well. I mean, the most amazing teachers in the world, you know. And then sometimes the kid's just not really into it. And they drop out of the whole thing, they disappear, and they don't really like to mention the fact that they were recognized as a tuku. I mean, in a way, that shows humility, you know. They just weren't into it. And then there's others who have tuku title. It was just made up or bought. Money can do anything, so you have to beware and really check the reputation of the lama carefully. And we have Google, you know, or DuckDuckGo now, so you can type in to the search engine name of lama, controversy, name of lama, sex, name of lama, you know, lawsuit, you know, and that kind of thing. You must do that. Sometimes I can't believe that people who were so well known to have had lawsuits against them for sexual misconduct, or people were still coming in and not even knowing about it because they hadn't done any research whatsoever. And it's hard not to say that's on you, buddy. But you know, you get that attitude from people. I mean, it sounds heartless, but it's like, my gosh, do some due diligence. But of course I feel empathetic. I was once very naive. There was no internet. I don't know if I would have looked it up when I was young. But please do. And that doesn't mean because there's accusations they're true, but you know, usually if there's a lot of them, then there's smoke, there's fire. Yeah, so
some discernment takes time. If someone's genuinely enthusiastic to practice, do they need a teacher, or this type of teacher, or can they begin? Do they need to stress?
Well, you know, I think the shamatha and vipassana practice are a good place to start. And you can do that any Buddhist, shamatha, vipassana. You can do that any Buddhist center. And these days, most of the lamas, like for example, Thupten Pache, you know, or Rinpoche Pache, but I'm sure that I don't know the East Coast equivalents, you know. or the European equivalents, they start with meditation for people, and that kind of that's really good. And then start learning Buddhism. You know, Vajrayana Buddhism is Buddhism, so learn it wherever you can. You know, the world. You know, I joked around the book a little bit, saying, "Gosh, you know, this is like the golden age of Dharma in some ways. In some ways, it's not, because things are really bad in Tibet under Chinese rules, not thriving. In some, you know, they're under the thumb of the Chinese government a lot. But in other ways, because people can receive teachings anywhere they are that they have an internet connection, it's unbelievable. This is just, it's only been, you know, 20 years that this has even been possible. And so start learning everything. Yeah, learn everything. And then later you'll find some of what you learned from maybe teachers, they weren't the best teacher and they didn't know everything they were talking about. You'll find, oh, I have to correct some things. As you go more in depth and more in depth. That's no problem. It's just knowledge, you know. Start learning, start exploring, you know, look up all the, after you weed out the ones that come up bad on the search engine, um, watch videos on YouTube, you know, and Vimeo and so forth of these lamas, you know. And you can even receive teachings from lamas who are no longer around, like Yudron Rinpoche or Dobu Khyentse Rinpoche. I don't know the equivalents in and our Dalai Lama is still alive, you know, and teaching. And they haven't been doing any webcasting this year so far, but there's, oh my gosh, hundreds of books, you know, dozens and dozens of books and so forth. You know, I realized that I wrote a book, but I realized that books are, you know, not read as much as they used to be. It's funny because there's 4 million books published a year now. And so it's hard to get a book to anybody pay attention to a book. But also the readership for books has gone down. The readership for classic Tibetan texts in translation has gone down 2/3 from what it was, you know, like 10 years ago. And people are relying on video more. So books are still great, though, I gotta say.
Love to touch on some things that come up for Ngondro practitioners. One of them is really pivotal part. You mentioned that many of the teachers you studied from spent a lot of time on the common or outer preliminaries. Common, and one gripe that we often hear, and as a teacher and a practitioner, I'd love to hear your advice. Sometimes we don't get it reciting liturgy, uh, how it transforms our mind. And I'm wondering, what is the relationship between accumulating verse recitations or liturgical recitations of the outer common preliminaries in our culture? Is it, how can we make sure our mind is turning and we're not just counting? And what is the efficacy of that traditional mode practice?
So James, just to give people a little background, the first 4 steps of the 9 parts of a standard Ngondro, there's other, Gelugpa have 2 more accumulations, so they could say 11 steps for them, is contemplation of 4 thoughts that are supposed to transform your mind. Let me just say, I paraphrase them here in the book. That's why I'm looking at my book in modern language. This life offers a rare opportunity for awakening. Your life, the lives of all sentient beings and the world around you are temporary. Suffering, stress, and dissatisfaction are features of being alive and unawakened. Your thoughts, words, and actions all have consequences that will shape your future. So in each, there are liturgies. You know, people don't know what a liturgy is, like a text, like something you recite. It actually, you know, they there used to be many more practices and recitations and things that people did. And then it kind of in the 18th and 19th century kind of got the most effective practices for building this foundation were narrowed down to these 9. And I'm just going to say, yeah, so it's actually, then they were all put in a common liturgy. So, so that you could recite, go through the text and would lead you on a path through the 9 steps of the Ngondro. So there's 4 verses in each Ngondro, up 2 to 4 lines that bring home each of these 4 points, impermanence, let's say suffering, dukkha, duknel, or pain, the pain of being unawakened, samsara, cyclic existence. And in a way, they are, I noticed in one of the Ngondro texts, it said explicitly in the small print in there, this is in order to integrate this with your round-the-clock life. It's not about necessarily only, you're not, at least in the Ngondros I know, you're not repeating those verses multiple times, counting them or anything like that. In the Ngondro, you just recite them each time, and it takes some time to contemplate each one. And Dongsi Tili Norburn Pache, as I recall, one of his books recommended, you could take a month on each one of those, really focus on it. And so you're bringing it to mind, impermanent, like when something, in your working life, something just doesn't go at all the way you expected it to go. Or something, like James, say somebody, one of your clients moves away all of a sudden or something like that. Wow, you didn't see that coming. Then you can take the moment and say, wow, I really can't rely on anything to stay around. In fact, everything I see around me is just here temporarily, and I'm here only temporarily. And see how feel it, into it, how does that sit for you? So it's, and as far as recitations go, you do accumulate recitations, for example. In most longer Ngondro texts, you do bodhicitta, you take the bodhisattva vow to lead all beings to awakening. Over and over and over and over again. Most Ngondros is done as a sitting practice, where you're rousing the bodhicitta through various methods while you're reciting the words of the verses, the vow, over and over and over again. And I looked this up, in the modern research. What does this? It's not how we learn in Western societies, so-called Western societies. We don't learn by rote anymore. But saying things out loud, actually, in terms of memory, if you say something out loud over and over again, you remember it better. They've studied this in education science, done lots of studies. It's proven. If you say it out loud and you listen to yourself saying it and you feel your tongue moving, those motions or something, there's a physical component to doing that. You'll remember better than if you listen to a recording of someone saying that, than if you even listen to yourself on a recording saying that. So this is a way of internalizing knowledge. And if you've said it, then it's internalized, then you can apply it as you go through your life, like when I get upset, this is suffering and samsara. Well, what really is samsara then? Samsara, cyclic existence, Is samsara something out there? What is samsara? How am I creating samsara? How am I personally involved with samsara? And how does I experience, what does this, so you can puzzle things through for yourself. And this is why, so you really, I really recommend, taking an internalized, embodied view of your Ngondro practice if you're going to do it, instead of especially not thinking I'm doing this for the Lama, I'm doing it for somebody else. you're not doing it for somebody else. You're doing it for you. And for all, and again, you're doing it for all living beings, because you're going to become a Buddha. Um, and that's the function of a Buddha, is to help others attain awakening. So I'm winding all over the place. I think I probably lost my thread, but that's yeah, thinking and also feeling in your body. Every practice you do, not just those physical practices that are part of the Ngondro, such as obviously most people are doing prostrations. It's as part of their Ngondro one way or another, and that's obvious how you feel in your body. But more subtly, what are you feeling when you're doing the Guru Yoga? Uh, relating to it, and relating it to your real experience. That's better than viewing it as something Tibetan, or the Dharma's happening over in Tibet or Nepal, and it's not happening in your house. Equally valid. Bring it home. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot in the book that is in the way of very practical ways to keep up the practice. I'm wondering, we often get stumped on the prostrations. Um, what's some practical advice that you've seen or that you offer if we just can't do that many prostrations? How can we still benefit from that? And then also, what is some benefit of establishing a refuge field or a refuge tree? Often those two go together. So, what can we do if our main obstacle is being unable to do countless prostrations? And then, what does the refuge field offer us? Are we connecting in a way to vision?
So just as background for people, generally, people are doing their prostrations while visualizing what we call a field of refuge in front. And this can be a simple or elaborate visualization. And usually your Lama is in there, embodied as Guru Rinpoche or Vajradhara, a perfect Buddha kind of feeling, and beautiful, rendered in beautiful. You can find these images rendered in beautiful art, right? And sometimes there's 100 deities, 100 lineage holders pictured above, and all the Yidam or meditational deity practices in front, and then one side there's all the Buddhas, and on the other side all the Arhats, the other side is the Bodhisattvas, like in the Lopon Yudron Wangmo, on and on and on. And others, it's just like Guru Rinpoche. I can't say how elaborate the current Kagyu is, the Kagyu Ngondro is. I can't remember it. They use the Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga as a similar framework for their Ngondro in the Gelugpa. So that's a really interesting question, James. I think I'll start with the prostrations. That's where you started.
Sure.
I'm not an athlete, and it was really interesting to do as a sort of nerdy person, to do a lot of prostrations in my first Ngondro, and I actually found I enjoyed it. And there's a lot of practical. I don't need to go into all the put here on people aren't doing it. So, but there's things about being all set up to do prostrations, and so doing them before you have to think, oh, I have to go get this thing, go get that thing, getting yourself together and doing it, and then physical things about how not to injure yourself. And this you need to learn. It's really important. And the motion of the prostration is going, if you don't know, you're going all the way down. You're standing, and you touch your areas representing Buddha, body, speech, and mind, and then you go forward on your hands, and then you come back up again to standing posture. And it's very vigorous, akin to like a burpee or something, some gymnastic moves that we do it that are whole body, exercises. And if anything's gone wrong with any part of your body, you won't be able to do prostrations for the period of time you're injured, right? So one toe is screwed up and you're stuck, you know. So I actually got through 50,000. I couldn't do anymore. I'd injured my back. And anyway, at the weight I was at, anyway, I did prostrations. I was re-injuring my back over and over again. And I tried to reapproach, and I couldn't do it. So I had an alternative practice that my Lama gave us all, and for people who were in that situation. And it's good to remember that because it's so dramatic, you know, doing this vigorous exercise that certainly at your neighborhood silent sitting practice center, you never were asked to do. Although some people do prostrations as well. It's only one part of the Ngondro, you know. Some people don't even, they counted, there's different ways of counting the Ngondro. In Lopon Yudron, they count the prostrations as accumulation onto themselves, but it all ends up being the same numbers that you need to do. And so you're asked to do 100 or 110,000 of these full body exercises. And some people can't. And this is where working with a mentor, you can talk about what can you do. But even if you couldn't do a single prostration, it's just one part of the Ngondro. Keep doing and keep doing the Ngondro. Some lamas will require you to do things linearly, like starting with refuge and prostrations, then accumulating subsequent practices. But if they wouldn't want you to stop because you can't do prostrations right now or ever. Work with them. You know, having a lama or somebody short, you know, it's not like necessarily if you've discovered your true guru in your life or whatever, but someone you can rely on is critical. And it's interactive. That's why they exist. They don't exist to, you know, the purpose of it, to my mind, purpose of a guru isn't to tell you whether you should invest, where you should invest your stocks, or you know, who you should marry, or you know, this kind of mundane stuff. And lamas get asked a lot of that. But how do I practice? You know, and even the fact that you run up into an obstacle with your body and prostrations is a sign that you've practiced. You know, and to be honest, you know, you don't find that caliber of practitioner very much. And if you're really upset about it, you know, it's kind of great. It's kind of like, you know, if somebody comes and they're crying to me, you know, I don't have that many Ngondro students, but honestly, they're not crying to me. But if somebody's like really, really upset about this, you know, I find it, you know, in the big picture, it's not that big a deal, you know. But when you're really into it and you really care that much about it, I would be delighted, you know, to think that, wow, this person is really sincere. And so I just say, you know, work with it. We have real bodies and they can do certain things and they can't do other things. And then there's ways, you know, you can work with physical therapy, and if you know, work with helpers, body helpers, if you can afford it, to solve the problems you're having in your body. But don't give up. That's just a little bit of the Ngondro, little piece. And it cultivates all kinds, it's purifying your body aspect, and it's cultivating humility, which is, again, like really a big deal in Tibetan Buddhism. And it's cultivating devotion, because you're visualizing this wonderful, you know, I didn't say that much about it in my book, did I? You know, like beautiful imagery it's your way of imagining awakening, you know. A lot of deities are, deities are symbolic, and people may have had a vision that looks like that deity, but if you get into the practice of them, they'll teach you, you know, the 2 eyes mean, you know, this, and the 4 legs mean this, and the 16 arms mean this, whatever. They're symbolic representations of awakening. And you have that awakening right there in your heart. So you're just making a connection, and the Tibetan art is, the proportions are very, very prescribed, and there's a perfection to it that creates. You may, if you like it, if you have an affinity for it. For me, I love the art, you know. So I would I put a big poster of the refuge tree of my lineage in front of me, and that was really important to me when I was doing my first Ngondro. And I loved it. And I wanted to make a connection with that. I wanted to be part of that. You know, I wanted to be like that. So that's all I can say right now. Do you have anything to add, James?
Yes. Well, I really want to signal readers to explore this book before this one topic. Throughout the book, there are bullet points in each section that very generously share how you can. There are different options of how to approach the practice, and even questions you can ask to make sure that you continue with the practice. I wanted to come to an end with something very moving about some statements you made and some memories I have. Um, and I guess I would say, what is the main point of Ngondro? I feel like you've shared that, but one statement that you made was, I remember Reverend Lama Pema Dorje Rinpoche. In the in his last years, I personally remember Lopon Yudron facilitating with Lama Pema Dorje Rinpoche accumulation of the Vajra Guru mantra. And so there were two statements in the book, and it was really personally moving. One, you said this very well known experienced yogin at his later years, you when there was chronic illness, an experience of chronic illness, you asked him, "What is your main formal practice?" And you recounted that he said, "Well, I do the Ngondro." So there's such a pivotal importance of the Ngondro, and then there was some flexibility that for some of the senior students, if they wanted to accumulate this Vajraguru mantra, this was also not a concession, but it got to the point because it was in that teacher-student relationship. So I remember that time. And when I remembered that, when I read this, it reminded me of that time of you and Rinpoche. And now I understand a lot more how he was guiding. So, what is the point of Ngondro if such an experienced teacher and yogin relies on that as some type of formal practice, and then also makes the decision that you can be prepared if you just chant this mantra. So, what is the essence of Ngondro and this teacher-student relationship, or any part of Ngondro? But thank you for sharing those.
Oma Hon Benza Guru Pema City Hum. You know, this is the Vajraguru mantra. And this is, as you said, unfortunately, he had plans for that group. that they were going to, instead of people over 50, he felt, and this is based on his experience with an uncle of his who had students that had really great qualities, and they were recognized that when they passed away, they seemed like ordinary working people, but they had kind of miraculous signs that occurred around their death, and who were students. And they asked these people, who was your teacher? And they said, you know, this guy's name. And this uncle told people, older people, to, instead of doing Ngondro, to do 10 million Vajraguru mantras. And within a short liturgy that you can memorize. It's easier for Tibetan to memorize it than for us, maybe, because they're used to memorizing things, but it's just a few pages. And with a visualization of the Guru Rinpoche in front, and so it describes the visualization, etc. And so, but he himself, he practiced the Satir Ngondro, a long Dujum Tersar Ngondro, which he'd been practicing since he was a boy. And I'm sure he did many other Ngondros, I'm sure. But it was, I'm crying, I got a little teary thinking about it. Everything's in the Ngondro. And so the way it's phrased formally, you'll say the accumulation of merit and wisdom. And merit is a word that's kind of foreign to us, some of us. And I like Alexander Berzin's definition, positive karmic force. Positive karmic force, positive force. So you're getting some energy going in your consciousness and your body, speech, and mind, your whole system holistically is aimed towards awakening. And it's like you're putting fuel in the choo-choo train, putting coal in the hopper. And and how do you do this? By generating positive force through positive deeds. It creates, we go on the assumption that we have that our our ordinary unenlightened self has been built, and the concept of the self itself has been built from our bodies, activities of our actions of our body, speech, and mind in past lives and in this life. So we have to turn that around and put our energy instead into doing positive things, saving the lives of sentient beings, protecting others from harm. Those are like number one and number two, right? Giving money to create positive places for the practice of Dharma, to create positive art, things that aren't, we all hopefully are kind people that give to charity. But sometimes ordinary charitable giving is dualistic, because we have a sense like we're going to get the bad guy. I'm going to give to the Democratic Party because they're going to defeat Donald Trump, or I'm going to give to, I hate Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. I'm going to give to the Republican Party. That's the ultimate example of dualistic giving. It's not based on generosity and kindness to all sentient beings equally. It's not based on universal love and compassion, or we're trying to uplift the entire human race, all the animals, and all the unseen beings in the universe. It's really to serve my narrow opinions and goals and dualistic thinking about the world. So acts that don't do that they're just 100% positive, directed towards something really pure and beautiful, it's great. And then if you don't have, and sometimes that's money, sometimes that's doing, building a stupa, a reliquary of sounds insane, originally I thought they're going to do what? They're going to build a monument and they're going to put like $1 million worth of stuff inside it. What a waste. And there's going to be 300 people involved in doing this, working night and day for a year to make this happen or longer. Sounds crazy. And then you start getting involved with this huge group effort and pure positivity to create something that only has positive inside of it. In this whole world, how much is that is there? Only created through good intentions. And the shape is totally pure. And it's got the relics of the great masters of the path, maybe even the Buddha, Longchenpa, all these, male and female saints of the past inside of it. It sounds like really, really bonkers. But once you get going with it, it can change your mind, can change your whole outlook on life to be doing something only engaged really energetically with positive things. So likewise, there's exercises of mandala offering being the pinnacle in the Ngondro, but the whole Ngondro is this kind of positive energy, positive force. So that's one side of it. And then the other side is this wisdom idea, this yeshe or jnana. And on the sort of level of general Buddhism, that just means the mind of a Buddha, what the mind of a Buddha is like. It doesn't have much to do with our minds, really. So how would you accumulate that, But as we move into Vajrayana Buddhism, we begin to recognize the yeshe in ourselves. And so in the Ngondro, and all that merits a real support for that. Once you develop a positive mind, you can see positive things. You can see, for example, the teacher positively. There's also Kensei Rinpoche once, sort of said, like, it's like rolling up a piece of paper, you can't even see positive things when you have a negative mind, right? So it's impossible to make a positive connection with Dharma. So that merit is a prerequisite, some level of merit from this or past lives. And then the Yeshe becomes, you find it's your own, pristine consciousness. It's free from delusion, is right there as Yeshe also. And so you're discovering this in yourself. That's mainly through the practice of Guru Yoga, merging your mind with the teacher's mind. And, merging your mind with Guru Rinpoche or Vajradhara or whatever mind, you discover this mind of awakening, this pristine consciousness aspect of your consciousness, And so both of those together, right, merit and wisdom are like two wings of a bird. You can't attain awakening without both of those. And Ngondro fosters both of those. So that would be why Pema Dorje Rinpoche was still practicing right up, quite possibly to the day he died. And even though he was very, very stricken with a really bad disease. So he was, yeah. And so, some people continue to the day they die. Some people take on other practices that have all the elements of Ngondro in it. I'm not saying that everybody has to go one way. But this is, I just urge people to think about it. Think about if you want to, do you want to refocus in this life towards a bigger, broader goal? It's like a multi-lifetime perspective. A tide, to be the tide that raises all ships, that really open up your mind and stop caring about, stop caring only about yourself and your family and the people you like, your people who agree with you and stuff? Or do you want to be like someone who's got this beautiful big mind that can encompass the whole world and cares about all living beings? You can't jump into that. I mean, you can fake it till you make it, I guess, but it's not easy to do without Ngondro practice. I haven't honestly met too many people who did zero Ngondro practice, and I really had that kind of quality. All the Ngondros, all the lamas of the past, the great ones, they did Ngondro over and over and over again. And if we can even do a small percentage of what they did, it'll be so great, right?
Yudron, this is such a generous offering, this book, and I'm very thankful for your time. Is there any last words of encouragement or wisdom around staying on the path or practicing Ngondro? Anything you wanted to share or close with?
It's really, I just want to say, you will feel better from doing the Ngondro. You're not focused on your own benefit, but things like chronic anxiety and depression, which I had, on Ngondro, over time, lighter, lighter, lighter. And if you can persist, it's hard to keep going when you're anxious and depressed, and many, many people are. And there may be precursors to the Ngondro that you need to do if you're really in a state of trauma right now. Probably it might be too much to take on the Ngondro right now, but start where you are, get the help that you need for your immediate trauma, and have an aspiration or a wish that I might be able to do something amazing like that, to take a few years of my life and really focus on blossoming my enlightened qualities. Maybe I can't do it right now. Maybe I'm caretaking an elder. There's lots of reasons why you can't do it right now. Maybe you're facing drug addiction and alcoholism right now. You're just dealing with that. You can't practice. But to hold that thought that I'm gonna get a control of my addiction. I'm gonna get, I'm gonna eventually I'll be able to not be in this position of working, 80-hour weeks or whatever. Just make that aspiration. Through the aspiration itself, you could say some Guru mantras. Omahon Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Home, or Omahon Vajraguru Padma Siddhi Home, if you like. And just imagine, what would your perfect teacher look like? Imagine that. Think, I would like in the future. Omahon Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Home. I will find a perfect teacher for me. And I will be able to benefit all sentient beings as vast as space, equally, because I have the qualities of a Buddha. And just have faith like that the time will come, and your time will come. And then when your window opens up, jump on it. Do it, really do it. And then keep going. And when you meet people, if you go to a Tibetan Buddhist center and you meet somebody, you see those sparkling eyes and you see their natural kindness and how they are kinder to people. Maybe the person that you find the most annoying, they are gravitating towards that person to help them and be with them, right? Like the opposite way of where you've ever been. You just go, wow, that's amazing. What practice did you do? They're going to say, I did the Ngondro, I did the Ngondro, or I'm doing the Ngondro. So this is where it's at. And best wishes to everyone, love to everyone. And you can do it.
Thank you, Lopon Yudron Wangmo, Mayum Mountain Foundation. And you also hold practice groups. I've seen Trauma Ngondro,
Yeah.
Subdudum Tersar, even all of the ritual and Torma. So how can listeners contact your teaching?
Yeah, if you want that, you can go to mayummountain.org, mayummountain.org. But I'm not pushing my particular agenda. I'm a 66-year-old woman living out in the country, doing some things online, and we've got, search everywhere, high and low, to who you have a resonance with. But if you want to contact me, you can find me that way.
Thank you for joining us, and for the listeners, Clearing the Path to Awakening. I've read so many books on the Ngondro. This one is really reader supportive or reader friendly, so I hope you will pick up a copy, both electronic or hardbound. Thank you, Lopon Yudron Wangmo.
All righty. Bye-bye now.